Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. Well, changes on the immigration front and spies in our midst. And of course, oh yes, the US election. But we don't have time for any of that because what we're really focused on every hour of every day, every minute really, is the Prime Minister's plan, what he's going to do now and next. So we have assembled our GenX / Millennial panel because they're just so much smarter to see what they have to say about things. Derek Fildebrandt is with us, longtime active in Alberta politics, federal politics. Then he went back to Alberta and bought the Western Standard online newspaper and relaunched it actually as online. And so he's now the president and CEO of the Western Standard News Media Corporation. Tara Henley is with us, journalist, author, broadcaster. She has her own podcast called Lean Out. And that was from a book she also wrote, Lean Out, a meditation on the madness of modern life, which is, I think, our topic today, the madness of modern life. And Matt Gurney, co-founder of The Line, a nonpartisan collective of Canadian magazine and newspaper writers seeking to create engaging content, etc. I agree with that. Rejecting illiberalism and hypocrisy and all of those things. Welcome to you all. So let's just start with the goings on in Crazy Town. Matt, jump in. What think you?
Hey, I mean, you've got the closer seat. God help you.
I can see out the window.
Look, I think all of us in different facets of our lives and our careers, we've covered late stage governments before. We know what they look like. We know what they smell like. And this is one where I've been saying in the last couple of weeks, increasingly publicly, I've said it privately, directly to some liberal friends of mine, but I've been saying it publicly, openly. This isn't going to get better for them. You know, we're already into the announcing leaking high-speed rail stage of liberal government collapse. And that means the end is near. I think a lot of the Liberal caucus is kind of going through the 5 stages of grief, and they're coming to terms with what's coming for them. And for a bunch of them, they've got to make it through the next 12 to 18 months, however long it actually takes. But for those who are actually going to have to go out there and pretend that a CBC mandate review is still something this government has the time and the bandwidth to do, to pretend that high-speed rail is actually something that we're going to get anything other than a big announcement with maybe a symbolic big placard in the background or a bespoke little sign on the lectern. That's about what this government has the bandwidth and the time and the money left to do. They're going to have to pretend otherwise. And that's just increasingly, it's going to be mortifying to watch.
Yes, it is. I think it's humiliating at this point, but maybe that's just because I've been around a lot longer. Tara, you write about a lot of things to do with the media and misinformation and disinformation and all of those things. I think I was still a little shocked this week to see an actual press conference about spies in our midst and no interest, no take up. Everybody just, stuck the microphone out and asked, are you staying or going? And are you going to have a vote or write a letter? It's stunning to me.
It is such a strange time. I agree that was quite surprising, although I should not be surprised at this point by anything. No. I was in the United States last week and I was speaking to a group of women writers and I was trying to explain the politics in Canada right now and the state of Canada right now. And when you list it out, it is just so mind-boggling what's happening. I mean, we have a major housing crisis, a major opioid crisis. We have a cost of living crisis. We have the collapse of the immigration consensus. We have scandal after scandal to do with ethics and the integrity of our bureaucrats. Now we have foreign interference as well. I mean, it just at every possible angle, the country feels like it's going through a major crisis. And I think it's quite a time to cover and to digest, and I think citizens are really grappling with the state of things right now.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, there's I guess there are some who just say I've shut it off. I'm not paying attention anymore. But Derek, I was recently in your neck of the woods in Calgary, and it's not so much anger and frustration as it is just we live on two different planets here, and whatever goes on there is makes no never mind out here. I mean, they drive us crazy and they do this and they impose another emissions cap or whatever it may be, but it's just we're getting on with our life. Is that fair?
Yeah. And I think that the rage that the people, at least in my corner of the West here, have had, it's it's evolved. I think people are actually less outraged now because I think there's the sense of helplessness that the West has when we have a government generally perceived to be hostile to us is normally accompanied with a feeling of helplessness that we can't really do anything about it.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, it's almost baked into the price that these guys are gone. It's like the train has left the station and we're just waiting for it to get to its destination. The Liberals at this point are perceived to almost already be out of power. They're just transitioning out of power. How long is it going to take for that train to get to its final destination? But actually, it is almost like an opening scene of Final Destination that the Liberals are destined by the cosmos to be killed here, that they're going down. And so it's actually almost lessened the sense of rage here. People hate them. And I don't use that word lightly. I think that they are genuinely hated here. But it's almost a sense of relief that, hey, guys, they're going to be gone soon.
Yeah.
People are less worried. They're less angst about it because who chooses the federal government is generally out of the hands of Albertans and people.
Anyway, but the flip side of that, Derek, and I had some of these conversations there where nobody wants to or can make a business decision or an investment decision or any of those things. I mean, yes, it's baked in that it appears that they're going, but if you have to wait a year, if you have to wait till next October to decide if you're going to invest or if you're going to make a decision about the capital gains tax and what it means for you, that's a problem.
Yeah, but I've actually made business decisions baking in that the Liberals are going to be gone, that the Online News Act is going to be gone in probably by they get in the power, takes time to pass it. Approximately a year and a half, 2 years soaking wet, but approximately a year and a half. The media subsidies, year to a year and a half. These things are likely to be gone. The CBC, at least English CBC, is likely to be gone. So I'm making business decisions based on not the certainty, but the next best to certainty that there's going to be a change in government and that there's some pretty clear policy changes that are going to be coming with it. But I'm dealing with the business decisions I make at the Western Standard are small compared to the amount of money that people have on the line in a 1 kilometer radius from where I'm sitting right now in downtown Calgary. We're talking billions of dollars. So the stakes are higher.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
But I think that they're going to operate under the current regime, say if we're talking oil and gas. But I think they're preparing for the changes that come, and everybody's trying to make nice with. At this point, I'd almost, I'm not sure how solidly I can predict, but I'd almost predict that more effort is going into trying to lobby the Conservatives than to as the incoming government.
I'm sure
than the incumbent government, which everybody knows is gone.
Yeah, I agree. Going on. Go ahead, Matt. I mean, we're talking to 3 entrepreneurs here, so you're all affected by the economic side of it. But again, smaller decisions than the fate of the energy sector or agriculture.
Yeah, no, you're talking to 3 entrepreneurs, but you're also talking to 3 entrepreneurs, and God bless us all. But like, we're relatively small scale, and we're all operating in a fairly narrow industry, right? Like, a lot of our experiences, perspectives are going to be pretty aligned with each other. What is more interesting to me, like Derek, you'd mentioned kind of like the radius of a click around where you're sitting right now. I need to draw my radius a bit bigger, but like within 5 miles of where I'm sitting right now, 8 kilometers for the metric people, I've got Bay Street. I've got most of downtown Toronto. I've got the Ontario legislature. I've got like some of the actual critical mass of money in this country. And to the extent people are making decisions, they're not making decisions the way Tara or Derek and I would. They're like, do we defer a $5 billion mining play? Do we wait to see maybe we're gonna invest in this Saudi energy product versus an Alberta one? We don't know yet. But I think increasingly, and I think people are voting with their wallets already, and I've written about this. I think some of the decisions on a business front that are just being made is to not invest in Canada. And if you've got $1 billion sitting in your bank account right now, are you going to wait for 12 to 18 months to figure out when the NDP finally hit their breaking point and the charade ends? Or are you going to go invest in the States? You're going to go invest in South America. You're going to go invest in Europe, the Middle East. Money is fluid. It can move. And I think people are already making investment decisions that are bypassing Canada. Not writing it off forever, but basically saying, hey, this next round, we're skipping you guys. We're going to go do this somewhere else. I also think Canadians are moving money out of the country. And that's not all Canadians, obviously, because most people don't have the bucks to move around.
Don't have enough
Canadians
to move.
I know who do, they're making plan Bs.
Yeah. Tara, I want to put this in the context of the media because I referenced the spies in our midst story, and you hit the nail there with we're so immune now to there's a scandal every 15 minutes that people have kind of stopped even writing about it. That has a huge downside because does it mean you're going to start writing about it again? And I guess watching the stuff in the US is really troubling me on how the media is responding. I was watching last night in real time when Joe Biden said that Trump supporters were garbage in response to what the comedian had referenced at the big rally. The White House has altered the copy. News organizations are explaining and changing the copy around this story, and it's seeming normal. That's very troubling.
It's exceptionally troubling. I think we're at a very difficult moment with media right now. And this is something I've thought about and researched a lot. And I think it goes back to the election of Donald Trump in 2016 and deliberate choices that the mainstream media made in that context. There was a feeling in the press of this being an existential threat. There are people who believe that this is fascism. And there were deliberate decisions made to throw out some of the standards and practices of how the media operates. And these were very explicitly articulated in places like the New York Times. I'm thinking about a column from Jim Ruttenberg saying, it's time to throw out the playbook and become more oppositional than we've ever been, and that anyone who works in news gathering has ever contemplated being.
Well, and look at the 60 Minutes decision. I mean, still, this is just, that is a program with a reputation for decades who just basically did an edit, took out an answer to a question, put in a different one, and still won't concede.
And won't release the transcript and all the rest. And this is part of a bigger pattern. I mean, when the media gets this polarized, when you have a sense of ideological capture going on, you also have an inability to think critically and an inability to understand that what the public needs from the media is to admit when we make mistakes. And there's just no ground being ceded. And it just is further and further diminishing trust in the media. And I think it's going to take a long time to get it back if we actually make some changes in our operations.
Yeah, if you make the changes, I was reading, I listened to it actually, Matt Taibbi's speech in Washington a couple of weeks ago, and he basically said the horse is out of the barn when people start using misinformation and disinformation as if they were real things, when there's really only, two sides to a coin, there's right and wrong. That we're into a whole other world. I mean, Matt, how is it impacting what you're doing? And then I'll go to Derek to ask.
Within 1 or 2 years, I will not be able to be confident that if someone sends me a video, it's real.
Yeah.
And we're already at the point where I'm reasonably confident, but not totally confident. Like I've gone from, wow, okay, like Rob Ford with a crack pipe, right? Like a grainy video, eventually kind of everybody in the Toronto media, we saw it and we trusted it. We're like, yeah, that's Rob Ford smoking crack in a basement somewhere. Someone shows up in the next 2 years and shows me a video of President Harris or President Trump saying something insane in a so-called hot mic moment. I don't know if it's real. You know, and the three, I mean, all four of us, there's more than enough audio of our voices that exists on the internet that someone with a $50 app is going to be able to spoof a clip pretty soon going, hey, I saw Gurney or Fildebrandt or Tara or Pamela. I saw them at a bar and they were drunk and they were ranting and I snuck up next to them and I recorded them. It's going to sound like us. It's not going to be us. So I honestly, like, it's funny. I was listening to Tara, you and Pam, they were talking about all this stuff happening in the United States. And I'm really impressed that you guys have the time to follow it. I don't. You guys know 1,000% more than I do. I've written off the United States.
I'm an insomniac, don't have the bandwidth. So I have an
excuse. And I'm a news junkie. So.
Oh, I am too. But like, I've got my own flailing country to cover. I just don't have the emotional or intellectual bandwidth to spare any time for anyone else. So there's not enough of me and there aren't enough people like me to stay on top of everything happening in this country. 2 years from now, when people can literally make up video and audio clips on demand, I don't know how we're going to do this.
No, that's really troubling, because when you have to shut it down, when it's your business and you have to say, no, I've only got this much bandwidth, then we do stop covering and reporting and informing. So Derek, how are you operating these days?
You know, it's, I know Matt and his co-editor, Jen, have talked about this a lot, is the danger of audience capture. And it's a danger that I think the legacy media is just as susceptible to as we are. Back when media had a much more diversified revenue stream, you didn't have to be as worried about it. When, say the Calgary Herald was not perceived to be on the orange team or the blue team, you could read it and get angry about it and say, whatever, there'll be another columnist in there that I do like. Now, we took some pretty hard shots at Pierre Poilievre when he had the Conservatives vote with the NDP in the bloc on the old age security thing. And, we had a number of people call and say, you guys are working for the Liberals, unsubscribe. Okay, well, it wasn't a ton of people, but it was a few people, and that cost us money. We could do it. But, there are times where we come to an issue and, I have to stop and think. Just yesterday, we're faced with, election denialism in British Columbia, where completely unsubstantiated, some people, were saying, this is cooked. The BC election was rigged. I actually do think election fraud does and can take place. It's normally not on a level that can swing the results. BC was close enough that hypothetically it could, but there was no evidence of it whatsoever. And this is something that's seeped into Canada. And I think there's been some good things that have seeped into Canada from the Trump movement. I think people are less reverential and deferential to authority. They're willing to speak their mind a bit more. There's good things, but there's some bad things too. And that is just, my side can't possibly lose in a fair election. If we lost, it means it's cooked.
Fixed. Yeah.
And so we did some writing on this, and I had to stop and think. I said, we are going to lose subscribers. We're going to lose subscribers over this. And
I want to ask you about the Poilievre thing, because they did that for straight up politics. So did your story say this is just straight up politics, or did it say this is a violation of the Conservative Code? They shouldn't be supporting this kind of spending.
Well, we're, for an independent, we're not big, but for an independent, we're probably on the bigger side. We have a separate news and opinion division. Our news side was pretty straight down the middle. Our opinion side was very much, yes, the Conservatives are just doing this for pure politics. We could perhaps even understand why, but, don't pee up my leg and tell me it's raining. This is why they did it. And shockingly, and we hate to see it, but the Liberals were on the right side here. The Liberals were actually talking a bit more sense about how unnecessary this is, that this is a wealth transfer from a wealthy demographic, from a poor demographic to a wealthy demographic.
But again, for straight up,
it was clear politics. I don't think the Conservatives spoke much to it. But, it's like supply management, which we hit the Conservatives on. If like what drove me crazy about Andrew Scheer's defense of supply management was he pretended to believe it when I just look into his eyes. I know he was not telling the truth. If a conservative looks at me and says, you know what, the milk mafia is just too damn powerful and we're just going to lose if we fight them and we can't do anything else we want. I don't like that argument, but at least that's intellectually honest and I can maybe accept that. And it was the same with OAS. Don't tell me. I know you guys well. I know you personally. I know not one of you believe this was a good policy. You know it's bad policy. Just don't lie to me.
Look, it's the real dairy quotas are the real reason Quebec will never separate, because it's just too damn valuable. So Tara, to you on some of these questions. I mean, you're not in the news business per se, but even as you choose your subjects and your discussions, and I've heard a lot of your podcasts where you're talking politics and you're around the edges of that and the culture changes that are going on, and so much of the political debate has become a culture debate. We just watched it in the province of Saskatchewan, where Scott Moe got punished, or at least slapped on the wrist, because in the middle of a campaign he said, changing girls and boys in the wrong change room is my number one priority.
I just want to point out that was us that broke that story.
Yes, I know, when you got into it there. Thank you, Derek. But it was people saying, we got some serious crisis here. Get back on track. Deal with the affordability crisis and the fact that we're all going to food banks. So are you looking for certain messages that you want to reinforce and engage people on, even in your non-news approach to this?
I do really try to pick issues that resonate broadly with Canadians. I think right now what we're dealing with is that there are political polarization on both sides and certainly in parts of the media. But when you speak to regular people on the subway, in the grocery store, on the street, I have a dog, so I talk to people all the time. I think most people are fairly reasonable and would fall into the camp of what we call the exhausted majority, that they're really tired of how volatile our politics are and are really focused on cost of living issues, public safety on the streets, the opioid crisis, the housing crisis, the cost of groceries. I think so. I try very hard to focus on issues that resonate broadly, but also in my approach, I try myself not to get polarized, which I think is hard to do. I come from the left, so I have to make a real effort to book more conservative guests, to investigate more conservative views, to understand that, there's a lot of different debates within different conservative circles, and to try to research that more. But I do think that that's a difficult thing to do in our media environment right now. I think that all of the incentives online run in a different direction. So I think it requires, first of all, the resolve to stay in that sort of ethos, but also the willingness to sacrifice sometimes clicks or subscriptions. And then thirdly, to listen to feedback about when you are getting pulled to extremes and to try to pull yourself back to center. I think it's a lot. I think it's a lot of work. I also think it's a really incredibly interesting time. And I love talking to guests and I love talking to fellow Canadians. And so I think it's also a really interesting time for us.
The exhaustion factor, Matt, I mean, it kind of goes to what you're saying. Does it change what you're doing? Like, people just don't care about foreign interference. People just don't, so why bother? Why don't we just have yet another conversation about, whether Justin Trudeau is a narcissist or not, because everybody's at least engaged on that and it's simple. Is it changing what you're doing?
I think there's two ways of answering that. One of them is practical, the other is philosophical. On a practical sense, if I'm writing something about an issue where I think public doesn't care very much, but I think they should, I need to front load that. I need to explain pretty early in the column or in a podcast, if it's spoken word, why does it matter? And I need to try and explain to people in terms that they can grasp why it should matter to them. And then I make my case. On the philosophical level, I think that's almost the bigger and more interesting question. And Tara, I was nodding along when you were talking there. I agree that there's this exhausted middle ground of people who feel like they've been punched in the face over and over by reality for the last 5 or 10 years. And they just don't have the stomach to get up in the morning and turn on the news or open a newspaper and be depressed. And I have been watching two things happen to people I know. I would say the majority have basically tuned out. And this is just people I know, normal. I have a dog too. And I walk in him and you're talking to people in the park. People who used to be highly engaged in the news, well, now all you tell me, I just can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Like I got to get food on the table. I got to get the kids to soccer. I don't have time to care about this. But there's the other side. And we have been talking around this. I don't know if we've engaged it fully. There's also the group of people who, I think it's a smaller group, who've simply gone nuts.
Yeah.
And they wake up in the morning and they're convinced that the woke left or the fascist right is out to get them. Mm-hmm. And they carry in their pockets a light speed supercomputer with the total access of all human knowledge. And they get up every morning and they find a fresh example that tells them they're right.
Yeah.
And I know friends who are absolutely 100% convinced that Donald Trump is a Nazi and he's going to turn America into some analog of the Third Reich. And every morning they get up and some dumb Republican sheriff somewhere in Idaho has said a stupid thing that 50 years ago, 15 people would have heard. It will lead the news for 2 weeks. Yeah. MSNBC will have it on a loop. I have friends who are freaked out about gender reassignment surgery and hormones. And how we're using those with kids. And they get up in the morning and they check the Daily Mail and they hear about some weird thing that happened in Denmark and they're talking about it for 10 days straight. We're all having, the internet is basically the world's greatest confirmation bias machine. It is telling us everything that we already think is right. And I'm losing people. I am looking at people who are just going insane. And I don't know how we're going to get them back unless we turn the internet off.
Yeah, no, we've been saying this for years, but it does seem to have intensified. I mean, if you are only an MSNBC viewer or only a Fox viewer or, whatever your algorithm leads you to read on any given day, and your algorithm also is narrowing that process because as soon as you click on something, it takes you in that, in an even narrower speed. So, the question is, what does the individual do that's overwhelmed, that wants to be informed, doesn't have the time? They do have to work for a living and take the kids to hockey. I've written about this myself. We're our own editors now. We have to go through this mass of information and decide what we put on our own front page. And that's a lot of work. And mostly you can't do it. So how are you dealing with that part, Derek? Are you just, this is what we're putting out. If you want to read this, do, and I can't help you on any other front.
I used to say, people should read more than one news source. Don't just read the Western Standard, read the Tyee, don't just read the National Post, read the Toronto Star. But increasingly, I find no one's willing to do that. Especially when
to Matt's point, they're not.
Yes.
People are hesitant enough to put down $5 or $10 a month for a source of news and information that they do like. They're much more hesitant to do that for a source of news that they don't like. Right. Now, I do have a subscription at the Toronto Star. I hate read it. But I every once in a while I'll actually find something insightful, but I mostly hate read it. But I'm in the industry, so I can justify putting money down for sources of information that I don't like. So it's easy to say, well, read stuff from both sides, but especially when you have to pay for stuff from both sides, that's a pretty tall order. I increasingly don't see a way out of our information silos. Yeah. We try to do our best at the Standard by having a separate news division, or news department and opinion department. But our news department, while we're pretty strict at trying to get our reporters to report fairly and evenly, we still cover subject matter that is of interest to our people. The way I put it is, we don't do conservative news, but we do news for conservatives that is of interest to them. I've had liberal and New Democrat types work here, and they're able to do fine work and write I think fair and even-handed news copy, but they would always want to select stories that just don't aren't of any interest to our people, so they wouldn't
Yeah,
get
see,
clicks and they wouldn't get
this
paid.
is this is
So
the trouble with subsidized media, with the government deciding that it's going to pay the salaries of reporters in Ottawa or subsidize it through the news organizations, that already skews what content is supported in that sense. So
we're
that's,
damned if we do, damned if we don't. I mean,
yeah.
if we do, Matt had a good point that like we do write about things that we think people should care about, even if they don't. But at the end of the day, that's not economically viable. Like it doesn't pay the bills, and if you don't pay the bills, well, you're going to end up on government subsidies. So
Mhm.
either you're doing stuff that is not of interest to your readers, and then you're not economically viable, or on the other polar opposite, as I talked about this earlier, is the danger of audience capture, that you're just literally feeding nothing but red meat all day, every day, and that's not healthy either. And our news ecosystem, our information ecosystem, is a buffet. No one has to sit down and buy the 10-course meal that we want to serve them. You're not opening the Calgary Herald and okay, I'm ready to read the news section, the opinion section, the
Mhm.
sports, the
And the
business.
sports and
No
going
one
to.
does that. They pick what they want from the buffet. And as much as we try to make them eat the 10-course meal, we can't force them anymore. And so
So Matt,
I'm not sure. I don't have any good answer to
does
how we
does that
provide any balance anymore.
does
Well,
that make us stupider or just narrower, or are we just more disciplined and just say I can only know five things today?
I'll be brief about this because I know Tara wants to jump in.
Yeah.
I will say knowing five things a day to me sounds pretty aspirational. You guys might be doing better than I am. No, I think what Derek has identified here is exactly the way I see it, and I think we're both saying the same thing, but we're saying it a little bit differently. Let me try to summarize the Fildebrandt to Gurney position on this one, which is that right now our audience is basically two categories. There's a big one of people that are probably intellectually curious and open-minded and value getting a lot of perspectives, but they're exhausted and they're depressed and they don't want to read what we're writing. There's a much smaller group of people that is willing to open their wallets and hand me a lot of money every month as long as I tell them what they want to hear. And I don't know yet how to balance that. Like what we do at the line is that we're pretty ruthless about biting the hand that feeds us on a regular schedule, where we will explicitly go out of our way to be like, hey, everybody, great. Like, thank you so much for being here. Here's something you're going to hate. Like
Yeah.
you are going to hate this, and we're going to ram it down your throat and tell you it's good for you. And we call, I mean, exactly the same experience Derek's had. We get people go, "What the hell? I'm not giving you my money. I'm unsubscribing." And we wish them all the best because that person was never going to be long-term revenue for us anyway. The
Yeah.
sooner we get rid of them, the less time we waste trying to retain them. What I have spent the last 4 years doing is trying to cultivate a segment of the Canadian population that is as emotionally broken and intellectually weird as I am. And if I can find those people, they'll keep giving me money and I'll be able to buy a boat one day. In the meantime, I've got to just kind
a
of get
boat.
through one day at a time.
No, I think that's true, that is part of the process of shedding those. You can't be all things to all people, and they don't want you to be. And the whole concept of loyalty, which is, I always read the Globe and Mail every day, and I'm going to do so until I die. That's, where it doesn't happen in voting patterns, it doesn't happen in news consuming patterns, or even consumer consuming patterns. So Tara, go.
Yeah, so the problem that we're describing, I feel like it could be addressed were the CBC to actually live up to its mandate. I mean, if the CBC was a vehicle for accessing accurate information and perspectives from all sides of the debates in Canada, it could be an anchor in this country. It could be a source where you would have curated information where you could go to one place and get different views
Okay,
and for free.
Happening.
It is not happening. But I just want to point out that there is a solution. It's just not living up to what it's meant to do. And I recognize that, it's likely going to get defunded, which makes me personally sad. But in terms of solutions that are already at our disposal, that is one of them. It's just not functional right now.
But even in the US, when with PBS, and they took it off the public funding and said you have to go out and get your private funding, still, relatively speaking, the numbers are remarkably low.
Mm.
You know, there's that trust factor that you write about and talk about. Once that's broken with the CBC
Yes.
or with a political leader or whatever it is, it's
Yeah.
damn hard to get back.
It is very difficult to get it back,
Yeah.
for sure. But I don't know what other alternative we would have to get people in this country on a similar fact base.
I want to ask another question that's just kind of been bugging me. And then I saw an article yesterday that somebody had written in the Telegraph in the UK, said Canada is disintegrating. And they went back and, you know, did the whole thing that, you know, what Trudeau had said in his early days. There's no core identity. We're the first post-national state, et cetera, et cetera. This was kind of a little bit more focused on people in the rest of the world, you know, are looking at you and not seeing you the way we once saw you. And then there was one particular thing that really struck me because it's, again, one of those stories that's not really covered here, is the 100 arson attacks on churches. Like, that jumped out as a story to somebody outside, looking from the outside in. Matt, do you have some thoughts on that?
I don't think Canada's disintegrating as a federal political entity. And I know that's kind of a very nuanced way of describing it. Like you all know another shoe's about to drop when I start my sentence like that. But I do think we as a society are disintegrating into our own information ecosystems. And I think I don't know how we fix that. And Tara, you had said something a minute ago. I thought you were bang on. I think you were right, but I'm totally going to bum you out now because I'm going to take it a step further. You had said a minute ago that there might not be any other way than sort of a reformed and revitalized CBC to start actually bringing back all the ties that bind. And I agree with that. The problem is it's not going to happen. Like, I'm just like a step forward in my thought process on that one. It's like, there's only one thing that could save us, and it's not. And therefore, unfortunately, it's kind of a fill in the blank statement. I haven't figured out how to end that sentence yet. But one of the things that like really makes me popular at the few dinner parties I still get invited to is that I'm trying to tell people there's always this stubborn optimism in the Canadian spirit that we'll be okay, that it will be fine, that it will work itself out. And I think on the long term, that's probably true. But in the medium term, we're actually going to figure out we're going to have to figure out how to do things like build stuff and pay for doctors and defend the country and all of these other really interesting things. And all of the things we would do to do that are broken. And all the tools we would use to fix them are broken. And I don't know, like, the thing that's bumming me out, Terry, you're absolutely right about the CBC. But the problem is I don't see how to fix that problem without a time machine. And I don't have one. If I did, I would have other things to do. I don't know how we fix this now. So I don't think we're going to disintegrate as a federal entity because there's still value in this and we get along and we do interesting things together. And it would probably be it would be a hassle to replace it with something, frankly, which is probably the best
We'd
case.
have to invent it if it
Canadian
wasn't
unity.
here. Yeah.
But in terms of how do we actually start turning this around, as far as I can tell, every significant accountability mechanism we have in this country is currently non-functional.
Yeah. That's the other thing that you hear about government, and this is separate and apart from you know, who's mad at Justin Trudeau and who loves Pierre Poilievre and vice versa, is that the actual government has broken down, in part because it's centralized through a PMO, and this has been an increasing trend over the years, but that it's just not working. I mean, we had some obvious examples after the pandemic, which is you couldn't get a passport because nobody was going to work. But now here we are, and nobody wants to go to work, and nobody is going to work, and we're fighting about whether they should go to work. Like, if are you getting any sense of that, Derek, in this response that we talked about right at the beginning with you, which is people just sort of, sorry, I'm about to sneeze here. People just sort of saying, okay, this isn't working. We're just going to get on with our life and wait these guys out, and then we'll get back to business.
I'll answer that, I think, by also incorporating, you know, what you said in your question to Matt. I don't think Justin Trudeau was wrong when he says Canada is a post-national state. I think he was wrong in saying we're the first. There's been, ancient Persia was a multinational empire. Was not an ethno-based state. But I think Canada has always been. Look, I view nationalism, where the nation state comes organically from at least some rudimentary sense of nationhood in the traditional European sense. America was an experiment in civic nationalism, but they had a birth story, they had a narrative, and of course you jazz that up and whatnot, founding fathers, etc. Canada had to more artificially build its national narrative more than most other states, comparable perhaps with Switzerland and Belgium, which are not clear nation states. They're multinational political entities, but not nations in a traditional nation state sense. But so Canada's always been, for lack of a better term, I'm going to be indelicate here and say it's been artificial. It's had to be, like we had no glorious national myth. It was just Sir John M. Macdonald loads up a couple magnums of vodka and gets everyone drunk and signs an agreement. Well,
there was the railway.
Yeah, that was something that came from it, but we had to build on it, and we've tried to build national myths, but we've never been able to stick with one for long. We're the British outpost of the North American outpost of the British Empire, then two nations, and then multiculturalism. Right now, I think if I'm asked to. I like to complain about employment insurance. They're like, well, what about the people in other parts of the country who maybe do need a better deal? I have no connection to people in other parts of the country, that far east, at least, say if we're talking the Atlantic. Why? It's not like my neighbor. I'm probably willing to pay more taxes. I'm willing to, everybody's a communist in your house. You share resources. You work together. Mom and dad work more. For the benefit of the kids, needs and means, etc. I plow the sidewalks with my quad in my neighborhood. I don't know most of my neighbors, but they're my neighbors. I care about them in some sense. But the further away I get from my house, the less I care. And Canada is so massive geographically, so diverse linguistically, religiously, ethnically, that by the time I get beyond a few hundred kilometers from Calgary, I just don't have much in common with you anymore. I have more in common with someone I don't know in Montana than someone I don't know in New Brunswick. And so I think while Canada's never had that strong...
No, that's the problem with the unlikely east-west thread, where your connections are generally much more...
Canada's never had that strong glue of ethnic or religious or linguistic nationalism that binds together most European nation states. But at this point, where Canada is... It is an economic unit where we move money back and forth. The only point of the federal government is to collect money and redistribute money. And there's no shared sense of nationhood. So like a lot of us just kind of check out. We don't care. Like, I don't care that Quebec persecutes its English minority anymore because I don't have anything in common with the English or the French in Quebec at this point.
But Derek, don't you think if we had had better leadership in the last 9 years on this issue, we may have had a different outcome? I mean, there's one thing to say we're challenged in terms of building national cohesion because we have a geographically spread out country and we have so many different people coming from different places. Is another thing entirely to say that the project of Canada itself is not legitimate, that we have a terrible history. And I mean,
I never said that.
No, I'm saying from a leadership perspective, Trudeau is not invested in the idea of nation building, of national cohesion, of building a Canadian myth. There's no interest in that at all. And so
I lost my mind when they canceled the citizenship ceremonies, right? Because of that very thing, right? We've got to have some things to cling to.
There's no sense of this is what we're all buying into. This is what we're all trying to build. But there could be if someone was interested in articulating that.
So Derek said something that struck me because, Tara, you had an interesting pod recently talking about volunteering. what we really do, and our excuses for doing less than we care to admit, and all of that. And there was Derek talking about, I'm out there blowing the snow for my neighbors, but I don't care about one street over. Is that at least still alive in this country, this sense that we are our brother's keeper, or however you want to put it? Or was the point of that discussion that we're all doing a little less and we've made up a bunch of excuses why that's the case?
I think that, yes, we have made excuses of why that's the case. There's an idea, particularly on the left, that individual change is futile and that we need broad systemic change. And then in the absence of that broad systemic change, which doesn't happen, people feel complacent and they don't do any small individual acts. They feel apathetic. And the person that I spoke to on that podcast was Rachel Cohen from Vox, a young reporter in Washington. And she was talking about her own experiences trying to tap back into the community. And one of the things she mentioned that I think is really important is that civic kind of fabric has frayed so much. It's actually very hard to volunteer now. I tried, it took me 2 years to get a volunteer position. I was writing cover letters and sitting for interviews. And whereas there are other ways of doing this, namely, yeah. Crazy, right? But there are other usually faith-based ways where you can just jump in and start helping right away. I think that Canada would benefit from sort of broad civic involvement programs on a national level. And I think that people are hungry for it. There really is a sense in the people that I talk to that they feel lonely and isolated and that they would like to know their neighbors better. They would like to participate in the community. They know the value of it. It's just we don't have those structures in place right now.
Matt, what do you think about this?
I'm still trying to come to terms with the fact that Derek doesn't care that much about me.
You're Toronto. We clear negative about Toronto.
Well, that's the thing, right? He was polite enough to talk about New Brunswick, but I have the feeling where Derek's map might end. I don't think it incorporates Leaside. No, look, one of the things that could unite Canada, even if we are to be more of an economic union, which we could well be, and that's not a bad thing, we could be a great economic union. Like we do have a lot of good things going for us here. One of the things that could unite us would just be really good at being an economic union, being really competent at it. Saying, you know what, like we're a country composed of a lot of different diverse regions, and that's okay. We all get along, everybody likes each other, and we're going to work together. We're going to have great internal trade. We're going to have really competent national services. We're going to be the world's most ardent, aggressive free traders to really build the prosperity. And Alberta oil and Atlantic fish stocks are going to be commodities we collectively figure out how to work together to go out there as world beaters on the global stage. But instead, we kind of took the attitude of, nah, we're not going to do any of those things, and we're going to be pretty bad at doing national level services. So, yeah, I mean, I look, Derek, I'm with you, buddy. Like, I shovel my neighbor's snow. Yeah. My neighbor last year had a hip surgery, and I knew about that, so I took over shoveling her driveway. And we never talked about it. It was just a thing I did because I wanted my neighbor's life to be better. And, I donate to charities and I regularly. And one of the big ones I support is Global. And the other one is the shelter that helps marginalized youth in my community. It could not be more local to me. And that's the one I actually was really worried about here. I do feel affection for my fellow Canadians. I do. But I also feel affection for people in upstate New York and Maine, because those are the people who are kind of in my neighborhood here. So if we want to be a functional federation that's based on ties of history and economics, let's teach the history and actually take down those internal trade barriers, and let's get the passport offices working. If we don't do any of those things, it all ends in a predictable place.
Yeah, I just somehow, this is my worldview too, but just like let's have government stick to its knitting and not be involved in every aspect of our life. Mm-hmm. And then let's us step up as individuals and communities and people and do some stuff, go to the food bank. We know people are there in record numbers, take 5 cans of soup, but actually put in an hour or two, right?
That's dangerous thinking.
Yeah, your community's like that, Derek. I know, I see it. Calgary's very, it's a good community place.
Yeah, it kind of comes. people have a hard sense of having a sense of community with people they don't know and who are further away. Like people on the other end of Calgary, I care about them in a theoretical sense, but I don't know who they are. And so, but I guess, but in Canada, we're pit against each other. I've never met a Newfoundlander I didn't like, but I have some simmering resentment towards Newfoundland over equalization and EI. But I've never met a Newfoundlander I didn't like.
You didn't like, yeah.
They're the nicest people. I've met Calgarians I didn't like, but they're in my community, so I'm more likely to help them. And Canada not being a European style nation state with the kind of glue that holds that together, you have to have civic nationalism. And sometimes that's a bit invented. Sometimes it's not. I mean, we don't have the glorious founding myth that America has. And that's
we don't put our hand on our heart in the same way. But you've hurt Matt's feelings again, and I don't know what we're going to do about this. But
I'll be okay.
You'll be okay. All right.
In the absence of a big founding myth like America has, or the glue of nationhood the way France, Germany, England have. We've got to find something else. And I actually do think we have to have something beyond economic union. I mean, if you can't do economic union, which was practically in addition to defense from the United States after the Civil War, those are the two reasons Canada was founded. That's why we have Confederation. Those are the two things: economic union and national defense at a bare minimum.
And then the rest of us,
that's what Switzerland can do.
Get on with building a better place in our little communities. All right. I know Matt has to run, and so I'm going to wrap this up, but thank you all very much. I'm not as depressed as I should be, given what everybody has said.
Oh, don't worry. I'll be depressed enough for all of us.
You know what I think is, I think at least we all care enough to keep talking about it and even bemoaning the states. So anyway.
Exactly.
Thanks for being here. Tara Henley, Derek Fildebrandt, Matt Gurney, just taking a look at our world through some different eyes. Really appreciate your time, guys. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you again soon for another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen.